And now, Maine Web News.
Last fall, California voters decided not to make that state the first to fully legalize marijuana use for its citizens. Legislator Diane Russell has sponsored a bill that would give the state of Maine that distinction. She met with Maine Web News to explain her motivation.
In 2009, we had the Citizens Initiative that LD 1811 replaced. And what's interesting is that that was also the year that we had same-sex marriage on the ballot, and it was a hotly contested issue, very high turnout for folks who tended to lean more on the religious side, high turnout for an elder demographic, and ultimately, more than 60% of Maine people said that they voted in favor of legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes and opening it up to making it more accessible. So when you look at those numbers, this was a hotly contested issue, the same-sex marriage bill, and yet all these folks in demographics that should not, but in theory, support medical marijuana voted yes. We'd like to see this happen. If the numbers had been 52% yes, I probably would never have touched it. But when you're surpassing 60% of Maine people, at that point, I think folks across the state and the general electorate are ready to have a conversation about full legalization, and that's what brought this forward for me. It's an issue that we've talked about for years, but I don't think it's really been brought forth at a time when folks were genuinely ready to have that conversation. You couple that with serious revenue gaps. I mean, real consequences, budget consequences. When we talk about education funding, it was replaced in the last term through economic stimulus funds. That money's not going to be there. We either need to cut education, which I don't think is a smart economic move for the state, because it sets us back for the long term, economically speaking. But here's an opportunity to do what the vast majority of people probably want us to do anyway: create a revenue stream.
Meanwhile, Maine Sheriff Donnie Smith has questioned the effectiveness of the Maine Drug Enforcement Agency and offered some frank criticism of the war on drugs in general.
We certainly could probably save a substantial amount of money if the Maine Drug Enforcement Agency went away, and again, that money came down to the local. I could probably, in my county, I could hire 2 agents for every one of theirs, what they pay. So that would be a very substantial savings.
Does it make sense to declare war on drugs?
I think that's a mix of words. I think first of all, we've lost it. We've certainly lost the war on drugs. The federal government has spent trillions of dollars over the last 30, 40 years fighting the so-called war on drugs, and we're not any closer to winning it than we were then. So that's a term that we use is probably misused too often. So no, we're not really winning. We're not winning it anyway. So why would we consider? Why would you fight a war you can't win? So no, that's probably an inappropriate term.
Representative Russell is not looking to end the war on drugs. She insists that her bill is about legalizing just marijuana and focuses on the revenue stream that this cash crop could produce.
Marijuana is a cash crop. There are no real figures on how much money goes through the state every year for it, because it's a black market operation. But I have a sneaking suspicion that the revenue opportunities, if it were brought on the books, would be worth considering.
Right, and you mentioned you starting the conversation of legalization of marijuana by putting this bill out.
Yep.
Do you expect it has any real chance of passage this term?
I'm optimistic, because there's a little bit of libertarian in all of us in Maine. We're fiercely independent, and just seriously, you're going to get arrested for growing a plant. I mean, that's really what this comes down to. You're going to get arrested for growing a plant. So if you grow a mushroom and it happens to have hallucinogenic properties, is that a problem too? We need to get away from that and focus on the drugs that are really devastating our communities. And if we can bring in revenue through this source and target that revenue toward our community policing, all the better. If we can make sure that we use some of that to fill in the budget gap, make sure that folks are safe.
Would it create revenue by taxing it?
Yes.
Okay. So now you're talking about taxing a plant, which
yes.
we haven't done before.
That's a fair point. We also haven't allowed it to be legal before. You know, the real opportunity here for the state, if you're going to be legalizing something, is that the community, that the society needs to get something as a benefit from it. And I think that it's perfectly fair to tax it, and I just did it at the sales tax rate so far. You know, it's open for discussion. I leave it to the committee to determine where they want to send it, but...
Would you support legalizing it without a tax?
No, there's no point. No, absolutely not. This is all about revenue.
Okay, so it's not about freedom of choice or what to put in your own body. Revenue is your primary
That's their
goal.
primary goal. I mean, yeah, like I said, I'm a libertarian on those issues, and I don't think it's in the government's right to tell me that I can or cannot grow a plant.
What would you say to someone who says, well, this is a backdoor way to legalize all drugs?
That's not my intent.
Today's episode of Maine Web News is brought to you by Niffin's Specialty Meat. Stop and see them today at 388 on the Lakewood Road in Skowhegan.